My name is Shane Clegg. This is Corruption in Townsville Part 2. The date is the 16th of June 2013. I made a mistake in Part 1. The year was 1982. From now on I'll read straight from my diary so that I don't make any mistakes. On the 21st of the 5th, 1983, I went to the Tiger's Tooth restaurant in Palmer Street with a friend and his wife. After our meal, my friend and his wife went home and I walked over to Flinders Street. Along the way I stopped at the James Cook Tavern and had one tequila and soda. I then left there and walked to the Langs Hotel and had one tequila and soda and asked the barmaid to call a cab for me as I had decided to go to the Seaview Hotel. I then walked outside and stood by the front entrance and smoked a cigarette and spoke to the bouncer, whom I had a casual acquaintance with. Approximately 5 minutes later, a police patrol car stopped outside the Langs Hotel double parking, with 2 police officers in the vehicle, and the officer on the passenger side got out of the car and walked toward me. I knew this police officer. His name was Clifford Little. We went to the same secondary school, but I never associated with him because everyone said he was a nut. Constable Little's eyes were bloodshot and he smelt strongly of alcohol, and he was not wearing his gun belt or handcuffs. Constable Little attempted to grab my left arm and said to me, "You're drunk, I'm going to arrest you." I pushed his hand away from me and told him to leave me alone. Then the bouncer, who was standing in the doorway of the Langs Hotel, said to Constable Little, "Fair go, mate, he's just waiting for a taxi." Constable Little then looked from the bouncer back to me and said to me, "I'll be back in 10 minutes. If you're still here, I will run you in." Constable Little then left with his partner in the patrol car. The bouncer at the Langs Hotel then said to me, "He's gunning for you, mate. If I were you, I would leave now." I then started walking toward Wickham Street, and as I reached the corner of Wickham Street and Flinders Street, which took me no more than a minute or more, the patrol car pulled up in front of me and Constable Little got out of the patrol car smiling, opened the back door and told me to get into the patrol car. I knew I could do nothing about the situation, so I got into the patrol car, and Constable Clifford Little then got into the back of the patrol car with me. And when he did, he immediately started trying to get into my left trouser pocket and my shirt pocket, and I kept pushing his hands away from me. On 2 occasions I held Constable Little against the left rear door by placing my left hand on his right shoulder and pushing him against the door, but he would wriggle free and come back at me and resume trying to put his hands into my trouser pocket and shirt pocket, and I kept pushing his hands away. This went on all the way to the watch house in Will Street, and all the while Constable Little and his partner were laughing in an almost maniacal way, which made me wonder if Constable Little and his partner had been taking drugs. When we arrived at the Townsville City Watch House, I was told by Constable Little to get out of the car, and as I was walking toward the watch house door, Constable Little pushed me in the middle of my back with enough force to make me stumble and almost fall. When we were inside the watch house sergeant looked sternly at Constable Little and his partner, for he could see they were both drunk. The sergeant asked Constable Little what the charge was, and Constable Little replied, "Drunk and disorderly." I was then told to remove all items from my pockets, and as I was taking a cigarette packet from my shirt pocket, I felt an object between my thumb and cigarette packet. This object was a hand-rolled cigarette that Constable Little immediately snatched from my hand, and without unrolling the cigarette to see what it contained, informed me that I was now being arrested for possession of a dangerous drug, and gave me an open-handed slap on my back while grinning at me. And I'd like to state here that I was a cannabis smoker in 1983, but I never had a hand-rolled cigarette in my pocket before Constable Little told me to get into the patrol car at the corner of Wickham Street and Flinders Street. That'd just be stupid on my part. So Clifford Little put the joint in my pocket. The watch house sergeant then informed me the drug squad would be called to search my premises. I was then told by the watch house sergeant to remove my belt and shoes. While I was standing on one leg untying my shoelace, Constable Little struck me on my left shoulder with his fist, knocked me off balance and onto the floor. And when this happened, I believe Constable Little and his partner would give me a kicking while I was on the floor. So I came off the floor as fast as I could. I punched Clifford Little in the face. I knocked him out. I then turned on to his mate. I landed several blows on his face and chest. He was sliding down the watch house barred door, and then the desk sergeant came and grabbed me from behind in a bear hug, and he was a big bloke, so I couldn't get out of the bear hug. 2 other police officers came from the rear of the office area, took hold of my legs, and together these officers threw me into the drunk cell. Later that night, 3 police officers in plain clothes came to me in the watch house, and one introduced himself to me as Felix Grayson. He told me a search of my premises had revealed 0.4 of a gram of cannabis and a pipe. He then asked me where I purchased the cannabis, and my reply to Felix Grayson was, "Fuck you." And the pipe was a tobacco pipe. I used that to smoke when I was at sea. This was the first time I'd met Senior Constable Felix Grayson. What I did not know at the time was the amount of trouble this police officer, two businessmen, that's Chris Boyle and Dick Gunchu, aka Dick Ewan, and a senior Labor Party minister, Desley Boyle, would give me over the next 29 years. On the following Monday, I was taken up to the magistrate's court, and the police opposed bail on the grounds that I'd assaulted a police officer, but the prosecutor never mentioned the name of the police officer that I assaulted. But the magistrate granted me bail. On the 22nd of the 6th, 1983, I was speaking to a solicitor, Carl Palmer, who was representing me in the Townsville Law Courts, when I was approached by Constable Clifford Little. He told me if I signed a document that I had in his hand, then the police prosecutor would drop the charge of drunken disorderly and drop a second charge of assaulting a police officer, and would only proceed with possession of a dangerous drug and possession of a pipe. I told Constable Clifford Little I would not sign the document and that I would fight the charges. Now this is where the crooked solicitors come into it with Rail Judes. My solicitor Carl Palmer then took me to one side and told me that I had no chance of beating the police. He also told me that legal aid would not provide legal representation for such a case. He then went on to tell me that this is the best deal that I was going to get and that I should sign the document. Carl Palmer also told me he would not go into the courtroom with me unless I signed the document. He then said to me, "I'm doing this for your own good." I then realised that I never had a choice and I would have to sign the document. Carl Palmer then motioned Clifford Little to join us. Constable Clifford Little had the document folded to fit into the palm of his hand, approximately 70 millimetres by 100 millimetres. And when I signed this piece of folded paper in the palm of Constable Little's hand, he kept his thumb over the top of the fold of the paper so I could not see what I was signing. Also, he did this so I could not see the lies that were written on it. I was never told at any time what this document was. I was later to find the document I signed that day is called an indemnity. After I signed the document, Constable Little held in his hand, he walked into the courtroom. I then turned back to call Carl Palmer and he told me it's time to go in and directed me into the courtroom. As I entered the court, I noticed the only people in there were a magistrate, a court clerk, Constable Little, a police officer and Rail Judes, who was sitting at the solicitor's table. When I reached the table, I turned to look for Carl Palmer and saw he was sitting at the back of the courtroom. At that moment, the magistrate said, "How does the defendant plead?" And Rail Jude stood up and replied, "Guilty, Your Honour." I then thought, why is Rail Jude speaking on my behalf when Carl Palmer is representing me? I really did not know what was going on. The magistrate then gave me a fine and recorded a conviction and asked if I needed time to pay, and Rail Jude said, "We would like to ask for a month, Your Honour." The magistrate then told me I was free to go. What happened that day was this: Rail Jude's Clifford Little, Carl Palmer and the magistrate were showing me that the legal fraternity, the justice system and the Queensland Police Service could get away with setting me up, and I was a nobody, and they could set up at any time they wanted to. And when you add to the fact that Rail Jude's business partner Martinez represented me on a charge of DUI resulting from the car crash at Magnetic Island, when this same law firm was representing the person who owned the car crash, I believe the legal term for this is called a conflict of interest. But Martinez and Judes would call it payback. In 2004, I wrote to the Queensland Police Service Freedom of Information Department and asked for a copy of the indemnity, which I signed on the 22nd of the 6th, 1993, as I'd never ever read this document. I also asked for a copy of the facts and incident sheet. When I received the indemnity and read it, I realised it was a lie from beginning to end. The indemnity states that I assaulted Detective Senior Constable Felix Grayson. That's a blatant lie. I assaulted Constable Little and his partner. When I read the facts and incident sheet, well, it states that I was arrested for drunkenness and searched by a Senior Constable Warner. I do not know if Senior Constable Warner was Constable Little's partner, but that is another blatant lie, and I was picked up by Constable Little just the way I've repeatedly stated over the last 20 years. So these documents, the indemnity and the facts and incident sheets, are not worth the paper they're printed on. I'd also like to mention here that Constable Little has been jailed in the past, and when he was still a member of the Queensland Police Service. See a pattern developing here. I get done by 2 police officers and 2 of them get sent to jail. I'm going to end this here. Thank you. Bye.